JT Crowley is Talking Books. On the show, you'll hear from emerging talent and seasoned veterans from around the world.
Hello, I'm JT Crowley, and I'm delighted to invite on the show today Dr. Daniel Brubaker from Fresno, California in the United States. He's here to talk about his book, Psychosociology, Political Dysfunction of the Republican Party. Dr. Brubaker has spent half his career in academic medicine, including the universities of Pittsburgh Health Science Center, Oklahoma University Health Center, the University of California, San Francisco UCSF Departments of Pathology. And the last 20 years he spent in medicine, including legal and clinical medicine. I understand that with near to 50 years in the medical profession, he has specialized in a few areas that have been nephrology, pathology, and musculoskeletal disorders. Dr. Daniel has been a lifelong advocate of the Republican Party, COP, Grand Old Party. I even learned that when I read this book. I wondered what was GOP standing for. Now I know it's Grand Old Party. But his support, is it wavering? As he starts to question the direction of his party that he's so loved over all these years. With regards to his own profession and his medical profession, he's got no intention of retiring until his body tells him to do so. So let's invite him on the show to talk about the book he has written, Psychosocial Political Dysfunction of the Republican Party. Dr. Brubaker, welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a huge pleasure. And your book I found fascinating. I found gripping. I found educational. It's not a book, everybody, for a bedtime read. It's a book to think about. It's a thought-provoking book, and it certainly did that when I was looking at it. So, Dr. Brubaker, before we actually open the book, could you tell the audience, the listeners, a little bit about yourself and why you wrote this book? Why have you written this book?
Well, I wrote the book because I've been following the Republican Party, and the last 30 years, I've not been happy with the direction it's been going. It kind of starts off with Newt Gingrich as Speaker of the, Speaker of the House, yes. So he, was very difficult in terms of getting along with the Democratic group of people, and he was more or less always being critical and calling the Democrats socialists and jackasses and all that business. So it got started as him being an opposition defiant person, the terrible twos. When I would see him on TV and he was being defiant, I would say, geez, he's acting like a 2-year-old with the terrible twos and having his little episodes. So I was following him along and following the Republican Party for the past 30 years, and it's gotten worse over the past 7 years to the point of being mentally, I think, dysfunctional in terms of the direction it's going. So that's what prompted me to write the book.
There you go, everyone. Let's open the book, Dr. Brubaker. Now, there are 10 chapters here, everybody. And when I looked at your book, I have to say, everybody, that I read it while sitting in a cafe in what can be described as the old town in Bucharest, the capital of Romania. But I also started to read it, everybody, when I was on my flight out from Birmingham Airport to Bucharest. And I shared the story with a lady who was sitting next to me, and she was a a lady from the BBC production team, a producer in one of the programs, and she was fascinated by the book as well. And she told me I've got to talk about a couple of chapters, so I am going to talk about those chapters, because she thought they were poignant to the book. But yes, it was fascinating, to sit in the old part of Bucharest and read this phenomenal book written by Dr. Brubaker. But for me, 5 chapters stood out. So I would like to go to those chapters now, for I feel these chapters are a fair reflection of the book, fair enough to give you, the listeners, the viewers, a flavour of the writing of Dr. Daniel. So I'd like to go to chapter 1 first, Dr. Daniel. Republican confusion in differentiating fact versus fiction. You start this chapter off with Republicans talk about fact versus fiction, and how Donald Trump and his predecessors have told thousands of lies to the American people. You have various subheadings like observations, identification, documentation, analysis, investigation, statistical methods, verification, viral testing. You've got an awful lot packed in this first chapter here, Dr. Brubaker. So my question to you is, why the contents of this first chapter, and why did you set it out under these subheadings?
So I wanted to be educational, and I wanted people to understand how facts are created and how facts can be manipulated. So throughout this chapter, I was discussing the way facts are produced. And there's certain sections in there that I describe, quasi facts, and I also describe. I go from facts to myths, and then also to let's see, mostly myths, I guess, towards the end. And so, I wanted people to understand how dysfunctional the Republicans are in terms of disinformation. And disinformation is the intentional use of facts to deceive people. And that's what they're doing, and they're doing it politically.
Within your book, you also go on to say, particularly in chapter 2, so let's go to that. For me, this was a key chapter. You had it up, Republicans behave like toddlers. Now, when you put the word toddlers there, that really caught my eye. And I thought, yeah, this is one of the chapters that needs to go in. And my the BBC production lady agreed with me as well, everybody. This chapter has to come in, she says. So you're talking in this chapter, when you look at it, about toddlers, you're talking about the terrible twos, you're talking about the development of a child's mind, and you are talking about child psychology and how that also transgresses into adulthood. And you feel that some of those toddler behaviors have carried on into particularly the hierarchy of the GOP, the grand old party, the Republican Party. And it is those, characteristics that are affecting the way that you see the Republican Party today. That's why you've said they're behaving like toddlers. Would you care to embellish, embroider on your thinkings here for us all?
Well, as I started off with why I was writing the book, I would see in Newt Gingrich the temper tantrums, shutting down the government, doing all those sorts of things. And I would say, and this was like 20, 30 years ago, I would say he's having a temper tantrum. He's acting like a 2-year-old, like a 5-year-old. And I'm not the only one, recently who have said Republicans are acting like children. And so I wanted to describe the normal behavior of toddlers and preschoolers into teenage years so that people understood what was normal. And then I also wanted to describe what was abnormal, which is opposition defiant disorder. And that's when the terrible twos continue on through teenage years into adulthood. And that's what we see and have seen with Newt Gingrich, and now with a lot of Republicans in Congress. So I described that, and then also conduct disorder, which is another issue that starts out early in the years and travels throughout the teenage years into adulthood. So conduct disorder is a precursor to psychopathy. And we're seeing psychopathy and sociopathy in some of the Republicans as well. So that was the reasoning for the chapter. I wanted to, again, like I said, educate so that people knew what was normal and what was abnormal.
Because in the summary, yes, at most of the chapters, you do summarize that towards the end. And I was fascinated, in your summary in this chapter 2 here, you talked about deficient disorders and conduct disorders, of which you've just gone through. But I thought they were highlighted in the summary there, which I thought was very, very important. Don't you?
I'm sorry.
The deficient disorders and conduct disorders that you talked about in the summary, Dr. Brubaker, they're very, very important issues, aren't they?
Yes, they are issues because, like I said, opposition defiant disorder, this basically represents the meltdowns of 2-year-olds, and they have a lot of anger, a lot of defiance. They don't have any interest in terms of getting along with people. And the conduct disorder, young children are bullies, and they have a lot of problems when they're in the teenage years, being very defiant and doing things like destroying property, harming pets, and doing that type of thing. So it's clear to me that some of the things that we're seeing here in the United States with these shootings that are going on with schools and mass killings, some of the people are psychopathic and probably have conduct disorders. One example would be the shooter at Uvalde in Texas. He definitely had a conduct disorder. He had problems getting along with people. He bullied people, and he shot his grandmother. So that's typical of a psychopath. And so I think that's important to observe and also see those kind of activities in the Republicans that are in Congress.
I think that's a fascinating argument. But we, just to give people a more opening flavour of the book, I want to now move on, Dr. Brubaker, to chapter 5. This is very interesting, understanding crowd and herd psychology. Firstly, why did you put the subject matter of this chapter in the book? And what's the significance to the overall theme of the book? Does this chapter add value? Do you think this had value to the message that you're getting across here, this chapter? Herd psychology.
Yes, I think so, because I'm explaining why um, Republicans are following people like Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. And in order to do that, you have to explain all the theories about crowd psychology, herd psychology, and that's what I was doing in this chapter. And one of the persons that I was talking with from New York, that's a writer, said you have to include crowd theory in the book because it represents what people are doing following Trump and so forth.
Because you say, herd psychology is often used synonymously with crowd psychology. That's the message that's getting across here clearly, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Herd psychology is interesting in that a herd, is a group of animals that have hoofs, and you can observe this in nature with, for example, cows, or you have them come into the barn to be milked. You have one cow out front, and all the rest are following. It's kind of a contagion type of situation where the cows are following one another and they're compliant. So you see that also with the Republicans following various leaders.
Absolutely. So do you think at the moment, Dr. Brubaker, that the GOP, using these thinkings, these psychologies, is they're using it to their own advantage? And do you think it's a fair advantage at the moment?
That's a hard question. I think they're somewhat doing it intentionally and unintentionally. So the behavior that they have in terms of propaganda and that type of thing may be intentional, but then things like conspiracy theories, these people are delusional, they're paranoid, and I'm not sure they're doing it intentionally. It's probably part of their makeup. So yeah, it's a difficult problem.
I think it's micromanagement in a way. It's how they're managed, how the people around them tell them to do it. That's my own personal belief, anyway.
Yeah, that could be. I think there's a lot of possibilities in terms of this situation.
Dr. Brubaker, in the summary of chapter 7, you write the Republicans have gone from a mature progressive party at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, to a regressive, immature party at the end of the 20th century and beginning of the 21st century. Do you think that's a fair comment, that most Americans and others outside America would agree with you?
Oh, I think for sure. I think the Europeans and the Brits are really concerned about the direction the Republican Party has been going in and the direction the United States has been going in. I think, with President Biden, they've been comfortable with that. But look who's running in 2024. We have a fascist DeSantis, a fascist Trump, and it's scary. I think it's far more scarier than socialism by far. And the Republicans like to use, they like to direct socialism towards the Democrats, and it's not. They're not socialists because it's not an economic system within the Democratic Party. You have to have an economic system in socialism to be socialist. What the Democrats have is a social democracy, a utilitarian type of philosophy, and the Republicans don't have that. I call the Republicans. In fact, I came up with this idea that of nefariousism, which is the absolute bad for the greatest number of people, which is opposite to utilitarianism, which is the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And your philosophers from England, like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, they talked about utilitarianism and how great it is to reach happiness throughout life and for the whole society to reach happiness. And you don't find that with the Republicans. They want to destroy everything. They are trying to destroy all the good social programs that have been set up in the past. And it's absolutely insane. The debt ceiling that they're going through, this opposition defiant type of situation is crazy. It shouldn't even be that way. But they're conservative and they want to do damage to the Democrats, and they don't want Biden to run again. So this is trying to do damage to him as well. It's not a positive thing that they're doing.
Do you think certainly when I look at your book, I get the underlying impression that you think they're a little bit lost in their way at the moment, the GOP.
Well, I think that I don't know if they're lost so much in that they're the party of conservatism.
Oh yes,
and the conservatism that I think I outlined in chapter 9 is a number of conservative factions. And they can't really put that all together in terms of policy making. I don't know. I don't know if they're lost so much as if they are intentionally or just plain down conservative and want to stay that way and not make any progress.
Okay. Let's hold that thought there. Let's go to chapter 8, Dr. Daniel, which you head up, the psychology of President Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Under the section, you've got several sections again here. Under the section mental health and other brain dysfunctions, read the introduction. You write a short definition of psychopath, narcissist, liar, lacks empathy, and uses other people for self-gain, and twists the law. And you go on to say that you met him in 2015 and felt at that time that this definition of psychopath fitted him reasonably well. And you go on in that chapter to say you add manic, particularly when you're up all night tweeting. And you go on to talk about chronic liar, manipulative, repetitive, all, a character of what you say of Donald Trump. And I think perhaps it's fair enough to say that the world perhaps sees what you see as well. So this is, for me, a very, very important chapter that you put in the book. What's your viewpoint on why you put this chapter in this book, Dr. Daniel?
So there have been various terms for his behavior from psychiatrists, forensic psychiatrists, Yale, Harvard psychiatrists who have labeled him, and in fact, his niece has labeled him as narcissistic. I've heard the term sociopath. I heard the term psychopath. So I've heard all these terms and I thought, this is all under antisocial personality disorders, antisocial issues. So narcissism is under that, paranoia is under that, And you don't really see it in the DSM-5, which is the manual for psychiatric disorders, but I split out sociopathy from psychopathy. And I haven't found that anyplace else in the psychiatric literature, or it's certainly not in the DSM-5. And I did this for a couple of reasons. One is that people were using these terms, and they were kind of misleading. So I decided, okay, well, sociopaths are this and psychopaths are that. And in the book, I have a table. I think I have 10 different traits.
You do.
And the sociopaths, he fits the traits for psychopath and sociopath. And I think it's probably a spectrum. And that's maybe why the psychiatrists have called this antisocial disorder, personality disorder, because it is a spectrum. But I think in order to research this further, it would be best to separate them, because psychopaths have a genetic disorder. The monoamine oxidase inhibitor gene is abnormal. So there's a more production of serotonin in the brain. It causes anger and other issues. And sociopaths, it seems to me, are more developmental. So sociopaths are white-collar criminals, psychopaths are serial killers. So I think separating this two would be great for research in the future to sort this out, and as a result, be able to treat sociopaths versus psychopaths. And I see Donald Trump as having all the features that I outlined on the table, in this chapter.
It's fascinating, when you looked at the summary, again, the chapter 8 has got a summary at the end, everybody. And it's clear that many areas of his brain are dysfunctional. The neural pathways and circuitry are misfiring. Interesting, I thought. I'll ask her that.
Well, an example, I like this example, which is he repeats himself.
It does.
And it's quite repetitive. And people have thought that, well, he's doing that to, like propagandists use to repeat things over and over to get it clear to their opposition or to the other people what their thought process is. And I don't see it that way because he does this all the time. And there's a portion of the brain for repetition of words. And I think that's dysfunctional. In strokes, this gets shut off and the patients have aphasia and they can't talk. So they write out everything to communicate. And I think this might be a dysfunctional part of the brain that he has that's not working, and therefore he repeats.
Interesting. Dr. Daniel, let's leave the presidents of Donald Trump behind for the time being. Let's get on to chapter 9 of your amazing book. Summation of the psychosocial dysfunction of the Republican Party. You talk about child development, 2 childhood behavioral disorders that transgress into adulthood. You talk about moral humanism, QAnon, the start of, Donald Trump promoting all of the fascist characteristics and behavior to the extreme, Christians, evangelicals, and the religious rights, die-hard, relentless Republicans, conservatism in a variety of formats, white supremacy, white nationalism, the Ku Klux Klan, Trump followers. You certainly have packed an awful lot into this chapter. Why?
I have. There's a couple recent books that talk about white nationalism, and the whole book is specifically on that. One that I recall is hate. Let's see, hate in the homeland. I forget the author's name, but she goes through the entire uh, behavior and everything, where it originated from, this white nationalism. There's a lot of confusion with, I think, a lot of confusion with nationalism. Nationalism fits under the heading of fascism. Fascism is an authoritarian, far right nationalist ideology that the white nationalists fit into. And I've kind of broke that down to national conservatism, the alt-right, the white separatists, which are the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, the white supremacists, which is David Duke running that, the neo-Nazis with Richard Spencer running that, the Nazis. We have a Nazi party in the United States. And really, Nazis, in order to be a Nazi, you have to follow the German National Socialist Workers' Party. And actually, the leader of the Nazi party in America also kind of set that up. This is Rocky Sidhide, who's running the Nazi party in America. This was started by George Lincoln Rockwell, I think around the 1930s or thereabouts, and then he died and Rocky took over. So this all falls under white nationalism or nationalism. And a lot of people, use these terms, but I think they kind of abuse them, not really describing what they are.
Did you enjoy writing this book, putting it together? And what are you going to do any more writing? What's next? What's coming down the line?
I did enjoy writing the book because it was cathartic for me. Instead of being, getting angry every time I hear something on NPR or your British stations and British Broadcasting Group and the TV and everything, I'd hear something, that about this, something that's stupid, I would get angry. So I decided that, instead of getting angry, I'm going to write out my anger. And that's what I did with this book. So it was fun. I learned a lot, especially learned a lot about crowd theory. And then going through socialism, all the different kinds of socialism. I didn't realize how many different socialist ideologies there were in the world. And then also going through the history of fascism was also interesting to me. So I learned a lot, and I wanted to pass that on to the readers so they could learn as well. So the other question you had is, what am I doing next? So the book that I just in the process of completing is called Grief, Forgiveness, Acceptance, and Rejection. And I'm writing that because as a physician, I deal with patients that are grieving. I myself have gone through a lot of personal issues and health issues that I know firsthand what it's like to grieve and how I can possibly help people with that. I go through rejection. And one of the things that bothers me with what's happened with abortion in the United States is they're forcing these women to have babies that are really unwanted. And when a child is unwanted, it's called detachment disorder. And these children then become isolated. They develop into opposition defiant disorder type things. And to me, this is wrong to be doing this. So I do have some information on that in the book. I also, in the last chapter, I deal with hate or hatred as a rejection type of thing. So it should be another good book. I hope that people will learn a great deal from what I'm writing.
For me, I get the impression, Dr. Daniel, that your books, you've written them so that people can take things away from them. They're not bedtime reads, everybody. They're there to provoke your thoughts and take something away from them. Fair comment?
That's a fair comment. And,
good.
Also, I was at a book signing thing at the Los Angeles Times book fair about a month or two ago, and the people that was coming up to have to get a signed book were young people. They were college students, and one of them said, I'm going to do a little project on this for one of my courses. And I had a mother come up and say, my 17-year-old son is interested in politics. He'll enjoy reading this. So it's people who want to learn. The MAGAs in the Republican Party, they're not going to read this. They don't care. They have their mindset, and that's it. And they're not going to try to learn anything differently. They're not going to learn anything about themselves. They're not going to change. And that is what it is.
Where can people get your books from, Dr. Daniel?
Well, they can get it from Amazon and Barnes & Noble and from Archway's website. And we also have an audio that's from Apple. So there's several places they can purchase it.
So you see, everybody, that's where you can get the books from. And also on this podcast, you will see the link to the book at the bottom of the podcast. So you can link there and you can get the book from there. And also on the podcast, there are the links to Dr. Brubaker's social media sites. You can click on there and find out all about him. But have a look at the written introduction, because there's a lot more there about Dr. Brubaker and his book. But for the time being, Dr. Brubaker, thank you very much for coming on my show and to talk about your phenomenal book. And I can't wait to read the next one. But I don't know where I'm going to read that one. Perhaps I need to go back to another country and sit in a cafe shop and read that one.
Or you could go to a nice island in the Mediterranean and read it.
There you go, everyone. Well, everybody, as I end all my podcasts, I'm JT Crowley. Thanks for listening, watching, wherever you're in the world. Until next time, stay safe.